Are there any Russians here tonight? Any Russians?
The Russian government's strategy to support the Trump campaign.
I've heard about all these things, but maybe this is something I should hear him out.
Trump gets the Aguilarovs and Rob Goldstone.
I didn't know these guys well enough to understand that if this talent manager from this universe, had this kind of thing.
They all head out to an after party, raunchy Las Vegas nightclub.
This is the What and the Why podcast, special edition.
Rob Goldstone is one of those people that history sometimes chooses to locate at the right place at the right time in order to witness events that leave the rest of us baffled and craving information. His name appears in the footnotes to what's now called Russiagate, but he's proved that even footnotes can tell a good story. And I think it's important that he does tell his story. Much has been written around him, yet he's a man spoken about more than he's spoken with. There's probably a good reason for that. His story doesn't always satisfy our darkest suspicions about a permotanned president who is the embodiment of shady money and even shadier morality. Trump is, to borrow from Churchill, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, and Goldstone provides a few critical clues as to how we untangle this Gordian knot, where the emphasis is definitely on the Gordy. He provides timings for events at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow, where Donald Trump stayed one night during the Miss Universe contest in 2013. He was also at the ACT nightclub, where Trump was supposed to have witnessed a lurid stage show that foreshadowed events depicted on the so-called P-tape. At the same time, Goldstone doesn't provide the perfect alibi, and in one important sense he is probably key to Robert Mueller's ongoing investigation. He arranged the now notorious meeting at Trump Tower, where Natalia Veselnitskaya met with Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner. Though the meeting was not what Trump Jr. had hoped it would be, the very fact it happened might well show intent to commit a crime. Our interview isn't a primer into Russiagate. I began by assuming that anybody wanting to hear this story will already know what's contained in the Steele dossier and why the name Aglarov is so important. Much of Goldstone's testimony to the Senate is already available online, and many of the details have found their way into the required reading, of which Russian Roulette by David Korn and Michael Isikoff is probably the best. Yet if you enjoy Russiagate books, it's also helpful to read Goldstone's own account. Pop Stars, Pageants and Presidents, How an Email Trumped My Life is funny, breathless, and for what it's worth it feels as honest as these things can ever feel. It also gives context about his life among the famous and the super rich, and explains why he never craved publicity for himself. It is a book about surprise and confusion as much as it is about clarifying. It doesn't answer every question, and, as you see, it actually raises quite a few of its own. First of all, thanks for doing this. It's really good of you to join us on our podcast. And what I want to do... what I want to do is I want to talk about your book rather than the thing which you're probably really bored about talking about, which is Russiagate, obviously. So I thought I'd tell you what I thought about your book, because I actually really enjoyed it, because it was something that I didn't expect. I didn't expect to have a book where, well, first of all, I like your humour. It made me laugh. And I think the thing that came out of the book for me was, it was a book about a man who understands the world until that world becomes something that he doesn't recognise. Would you say that's a fair characterisation?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never thought about it exactly like that. But, so many people have said to me, why would you have been asked to send this email? Why wouldn't you have thought it was odd? Why wouldn't you this? Why wouldn't you that? And really what you just said answers that question, because even before I got involved in what now has become, I suppose, Russiagate, I'd already had quite an interesting, weird and wonderful life, full of the unexpected. And as I talk in my book, I was a kid who went to a school where when I said I wanted to be a journalist, they simply said, well, you can't. And, taking it from there, I'd gone on tour with Michael Jackson against the odds. I'd done a thing with Muhammad Ali against the odds. I'd become a journalist. I'd become a publicist. I'd become a music manager, all of which were against the odds. So, yes. But then what happened was I suddenly found myself with the shoe on the other foot for so long. I've been the one either writing the story or as a publicist trying to create a story. And suddenly the focus was on me. And that's where your question fits in. It was in a world that I knew nothing about. And it was in a world of politics, which I certainly knew nothing about. I had no interest in politics. I never have, really. And suddenly I'm at the center of, I don't know, one of the biggest political scandals in generations.
Yeah, well, that's actually the next thing I was going to ask you, actually, because do you have a sense of frustration that you're now going to be kind of forever associated with, like, 137 words, rather than the fact that, actually, what you discover in the book is you did actually meet Muhammad Ali in amazing circumstances, and you did actually talk to Michael Jackson. You've actually had, like you say, it's an amazing life, and it seems strange that this such a small thing has kind of blown out of proportion and kind of overshadows all the rest. How frustrating is that?
Well, it's, I'm sort of old enough and daft enough or wise enough to know that whatever else I do going forward, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, I know I'll always be Rob Goldstone, the man who sent the Trump Tower email. I think somebody asked me, do I think I'm Monica Lewinsky? And I said, no, because I don't own a little blue dress. But outside of that, I think there are similarities. No matter what she did, and I think she's done an amazing job to rehabilitate her life and herself, but it's taken 20 years. And still, she's Monica Lewinsky who, blah, 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 Bill Clinton. I think, yes, I will always be known as that, and it's hugely frustrating because it's not a world that I ever wanted to be a part of. It's not a world that I am comfortable in. And it's also not like I look at it as, wow, well, that's an intro into the world of politics. I'm going to run to be, the president or the prime minister or the whatever. Politics never interested me before, and now I've been a part of it. I know why.
Yeah.
It certainly isn't a world that... So, yes, it's hugely frustrating.
Yeah. Well, actually, we'll get to that later on, but one of the things that does come over in the book is the sense of bewilderment. What surprised me about the book is, whilst it answers a lot of questions, you're the person who is actually almost as bewildered as everybody else at what exactly happened. Before I get to that, though...
I think that's fair.
Yeah. Before I get to that, though, I have to ask you about the time you met Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, I was a young radio journalist. I'd just gotten a break in radio at the R&B in Birmingham, and I saw that Muhammad Ali was coming to town. It was going to be a big deal, so I did everything I could to make sure that I was the person assigned to that, and basically I assigned myself to the story. And I said to them, I'm going to get an interview, and they all laughed at the station. Was like, get an interview with Muhammad Ali, and the guy who was the sports editor was a huge Ali fan, and was not happy that I sort of cornered this little interview market and I'm doing it, I'm covering the story. And I said to him as a joke, I'll get you an interview, maybe I'll get you an interview live on air. And it was a joke, actually, at the time. What happened is I did go and I covered this 2-day event with Ali, and I asked him a few questions, and, he said to me, if you come back the next day, I'll do an interview. And I did. And as I was leaving the station on the second day, the sports editor, kind of a bit sarky, said to me, well, let's see if you'll get your interview. And I said, well, you never know. I might bring him back to your station. He used to do a live sports show in the afternoon. And I was so, not angry, but I was so motivated, I suppose, to try and do something, that I just turned it on Ali. And when he said to me, okay, well, about your interview, and I said, oh, are you ready to go then? And he was like, go where? And I said, no, you agreed to do an interview. Did I not tell you it was live on air? And I don't know how, why, maybe we lived in different times. This was in the 80s. He said to me, well, do you have a car? And I said, sure. And so I took him in a battered old news car and drove him to the station. The sports editor almost collapsed. The news editor to this day, like 30 years later, still writes about how he actually said to me, only recently, I remember you had more front than Brighton, and somehow you got him into our station. And it was a huge coup, but it was the start of me realizing that anything's possible. You just have to kind of have the nous or the balls to ask. And what's the worst people can say? As I say in the book, in his case, he could have punched me in the head, which he didn't. But the thing is, people can only say no. And so from then on, I had that kind of approach to life and to my job, and to my job first as a journalist. Then, as I say, the same with Michael Jackson. I decided I should be on his tour, and they should take me on tour. And I don't know, I talked my way onto the tour in 1989, and I ended up, literally being a part of his entourage. And why? Because I asked, I suppose. I don't know if anybody else had asked, but I asked. My approach, and it served me well, but it also got me into situations, the last of which is why I ended up writing the book.
Yeah. I just want to know what it was like riding around in a car with Muhammad Ali. What did you talk about?
Well, not just riding around in a car. Remember, I was driving this battered old car. So it was like he was my passenger in the car. It was ludicrous. It was really ridiculous. And even looking back on it now, but I think times were different. Like today, no celebrity would get in your crappy old car and go to it just wouldn't happen. But I think it was, we were in Birmingham. He was there to do this thing in Handsworth. It was for underprivileged kids. And that whole thing just seemed to work. And we kind of not bonded, but I said funny things to him. He said funny things back. It was the second day. And what did we talk about? I don't even remember what we talked about. What I do remember is that he would constantly scribble and draw and do little poems and sayings and drawings, and it was a form of what now we'd call attention deficit disorder. I don't know, but he did it constantly, and he would all the time pass me these things and give me these drawings and pictures and all kinds of stuff, and say profound sayings to me. But I didn't really listen because all I had going on in my head was, I have Muhammad Ali in my car, like. I now have to take him into a live show. I didn't have a chance to call the guy on air and say, oh, hello, I'm in a car with Muhammad Ali. I just showed up with him and just said, hey, it was Tony Butler. He was famous at the time in Birmingham. I just said, oh, hey, you wanted Muhammad Ali interview? Here's Muhammad Ali. And it was an amazing hour, and he sat and he took questions from callers, and it was really great. And as I say, to this day, the people that work there in my old news editor still comment on it. It's a very long time ago. But I suppose it was a ridiculous thing to do. But you know what? As I say, what's the worst that could have happened? He could have punched you in the head.
Yeah, it's an amazing contrast between Muhammad Ali, who is every way as famous as Michael Jackson, but somehow it's as though because he embraced his fame, it gave him more privacy in his life, whereas Michael Jackson protected his privacy, and then in a way he had none. It's a very strange contrast.
And also, I think then when people convinced Michael Jackson, much later on, after I'd done my bit, that he should open up his life to the public, it was a huge mistake, because you can't live the life that Michael Jackson lived and have, iguanas and bananas and baboons and camels and madness and a children's zoo and a fairground and all this mad stuff.
Yeah, it's
which you think is quite normal, and then suddenly go, oh, look, come and look at my life. This is me. It was too late by then. He was too bizarre.
Yeah, it was too late to achieve normality. Yeah.
It was bizarre, but another fascinating person that I still remember to this day.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I'm going to move on to, obviously we have to talk about Russiagate, but before that, I mean, you are now an authority on publicity, or you're already an authority on publicity. So perhaps you can now answer the question, is there ever such thing as bad publicity?
Oh, I love that question. So I used to always tell my clients, whether they were famous or trying to be famous or whatever they were, that I actually believed there was such a thing as bad. Not all publicity was good publicity. And funnily enough, my client that I worked with from Russia, Emmett, he very much, I think, was of the light that all publicity was good publicity. Interestingly enough, when this story broke a year and a half ago now, or whatever, and I was saying to him how awful this was and how I believed that this would have such a major impact on me, one of his answers to me was, oh, this might make you the most famous person in the world. Isn't that amazing? And I said, you know what? The American serial killer, Jeffrey Dahmer, was really famous. It didn't do him a lot of good from what I recall. So, I don't believe that all publicity is good publicity. And I think time and time again, You see that in the press. You see it. The UK is a great place for that, where I worked as a tabloid journalist years ago. And in order to be famous and stay famous in somewhere like the UK, as you know, you have to stay in the public eye. And a lot of that is doing stuff in the media and creating stories and publicists creating stories. It doesn't always do people good. And so, no, I think publicity crafted really well and publicity in the right place is amazing, absolutely amazing. But I don't think people should do everything, all things. The Max Clifford style of publicity, which eventually came back to haunt him. And he did survive, as you know, ultimately in prison. But I never liked that. I created a lot of major promotions and things, but never in the realm of, just do this. It's wrong, but it's right, if you know what I mean. I don't believe that, no.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's one of the things in the book which I found surprising, is how you were behind quite a few of these things which remain kind of iconic in my life, like the Richard Branson. Was it water skiing, or he was going to abseil down the building?
Well, it was like so I moved to Australia as a journalist, and once I'd switched over into doing publicity, one of the first people I ended up working for was Richard Branson through Virgin out there. And he was opening mega stores. And as most people know, Branson's an amazing character to be able to craft a PR campaign around, because he's interesting, he's fun, he's creative. But more than that, within reason, he'll do anything you suggest or anything he suggests. And one of the things that he suggested was abseiling down this building and coming down into this new area of Sydney where his store was going to be the crown jewel. And it was just at the last minute, like a couple of days before, I was like, he's going to come onto this monorail and walk on this track, and it's not yet open. We know that. But I wonder if it's electrified. And I don't know why. It's one of these things that hit you in the middle of the night. And we had the whole thing planned out. And I put this call in. They went, yeah, of course you can't use that. We test that all the time. And we can't tell you that day you're doing it, it is or it isn't going to be electrified, and he'll kill himself. So I quickly said to him, great news, the monorail is going to be operational to your store. Bad news is you'll kill yourself if you abseil onto it. So let's think of something else. And he came up with this great thing. He was launching the airline at the time. He water skied in, dressed as a pilot of a Virgin Atlantic thing with it. But, I mean, those sorts of things, yeah, that's good publicity. Well, not if it kills it. Well, actually, sometimes that's good publicity as well. But it would have been good for me. But the point is, I've worked with some of these iconic people. Branson, I knighted him years before that he was knighted in real life. I had him go, do a royal procession up the streets of Melbourne, and a lookalike of the Queen knighted him. He was Sir Richard Branson. And we laughed, and he was like, I'll never be knighted in real life. Well, there you go. He's now Sir Richard Branson. So, anything's possible. You just have to wait long enough.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to move on to Russiagate. I'm really sorry. I'm not going to expect you to recount all the details, because I think everybody can hear about it and read about it elsewhere. But I wanted to actually talk about your relationship with Emin Aglarov, because one of the strange things that came across in the book is the great affection you seem to have for him and he seems to have for you. How did you first meet him and then represent him?
Yeah, I met him the way I've met most of my clients, through word of mouth, through an odd recommendation, through something that you never expect. So I was doing PR for a young singer-songwriter in New York, and her manager said to me, "Oh, you're English and you've done stuff in different countries or whatever. A friend of mine manages a Russian pop star, and he's looking to break overseas in the UK and in the US. Would you be interested in meeting with him about doing his publicity?" Sure. Why not? He's going to be in the States to meet. And they said to me, he has an interesting background. His family are like the Trumps of Russia. And I said, well, that's interesting, because when you're trying to get publicity, here we go back to this idea of all publicity. It's easier in some ways to spark the attention of journalists or of media in general if there's a really good story. And if somebody is the Donald Trump of Russia or the son of the Donald Trump of Russia, and here he is, a billionaire that doesn't need to do anything, yet he's trying to be a pop star, to me, that's a good story. So we met, and we got on really well. We shared a similar kind of humor and a similar kind of outlook on how difficult it would be to break him as a Russian pop star internationally. But he liked some ideas that I had, and there you go, I was hired. And for a year or a year and a half, I did publicity for him. And then about 18 months later, he had got rid of his initial management team, and he asked me to be his manager, and I refused. And he asked me again a month or two later, and I refused. And then I went to Moscow to visit him for an event we were doing there. And he introduced me to the assembled press as his manager. And after I said to him, I'm not your manager. And he said, I came up with my own solution. I'll call you my manager. You can call me anything you want and believe anything you want, but you're my manager. You can give it whatever name you want that makes you comfortable. So for the next 3 or nearly 4 years, I was his manager, in all but contract. In name, I was his manager. And that's it. And we had a great working relationship. We had a great friendship. And I think we achieved some incredible success for someone that most people have never heard of.
How did your relationship manage to endure? Because it's one of the sort of unanswered questions in the book. You said you ended being his manager, but I couldn't quite sense what happened afterwards with that, because it was one of it's the key relationship in the book. I thought it's one of the reasons why you keep reading, because it is such an affectionate portrayal of him, and like I say, he does seem to kind of he did see something in you. Is that a tragedy that's kind of been overlooked in all this, or is there still a friendship there?
So it ended. Most people think that my working relationship or any type of friendly relationship ended because of this meeting or because of what happened as a result of it. Ironically, it wasn't that. It ended about I have to think of the time frame now, but the story broke in July of 2017. And a year before, I said to Emin, look, I've been wanting to take what I call a gap year forever. I never went to university, so I never took a gap year. And I wanted to write a book called Never Mind the Gap about could a 50-something-year-old do what an 18-year-old me would have done on a gap year and do all the things I'd ever wanted to do and detail it in a book. And I'd been on and on about this for years. And I said to him, look, it's a perfect opportunity. We've done all these things together. You're doing mostly your own local stuff in Russia, whatever. I'm going to take at least 6 months off and do this. And he said, no, you're not. And then eventually said, okay, fine, but you'll come back and work for me after. And that was really always the idea, was I would take off this gap year as long as I needed, and then I'd go back and continue to work with him. So the relationship didn't end in a bad way, because the idea was always at the end of me doing the book I was going to do, I would probably, not certainly, but probably go back and either continue managing him or do publicity or do something with him, project. Well, of course, events overshadowed that. And so I'd only been on this gap year for, a few weeks, a month, whatever. Then this story broke. And suddenly it was like I was front and center of this, because both Emin and his father and myself were separately involved in this. I'd written the email, but Emin had asked me, but his father had asked it. From a legal perspective, it seemed that we probably shouldn't speak or keep in contact, because I knew that at some point I would probably be asked to testify to all these things. And I didn't want them to say, oh, well, did you speak to him about this just now, or did you do that? And I thought the easiest way to do that was to just cut the ties, so that I could honestly say, no, I haven't spoken since the story broken, or since initially, I told him about the story breaking. So because of that, we really didn't speak much at all, although Emin sent me a few texts, a few emails, and wished me happy birthday, said very nice things about me, to me, wished me well, and I simply said thanks. It was that kind of thing. So, yes, it is a shame, because I had a great working and personal relationship and would have had again. But I think this was too big. It was too big a thing. And it's still going on. It's not like it's in the past. This is still very much an active, investigation that's going on.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you that later, but I may as well ask it now. Do you think you'll be able to go back into your original work, or do you think you've got too much publicity around yourself now that it'll be impossible?
I think if based on the year I've had is anything to go by, it's going to be very difficult in the short term. And by short term, I mean the next few years. To be a publicist, trying to publicize other things, when rightly so, the media say to me, well, that's all very interesting, but actually we'd like to talk to you. And I understand that. It's like I'm, for whatever reason, a bigger story than anything I might publicize. There's also another reason why it's very hard for me to do my job, which is there are clients who have approached me or who I've approached who rightly so, again, it's their prerogative, are nervous about being associated with me because they wonder if that puts their business or themselves under some kind of spotlight or some kind of investigation. Now, obviously it doesn't, but I understand people are nervous saying, well, hang on, if I could hire him to do my press and he's, given evidence to the Mueller inquiry and he's in the press all the time, or I can hire John Smith, who's an average or good publicist that no one cares about, well, maybe I need to do that. And so both things make it very difficult. If I worked in a normal field of work, maybe I could just get on with my job and it wouldn't matter. But it so happens that it's the media that have been around me more than any other group of people, and that's who I work with on a day-to-day basis. So it's extremely difficult.
Yeah. I was actually about to just thinking that, because in the book you mentioned the fact that your bank accounts were closed. Is that what you think happened with that? That it was the banks didn't want any association with you?
This happened for people that haven't read the book, of which I'm told a lot. When I was leaving, I was living in Asia last year, and when I was leaving to go back, the week I was due to go back, I noticed I couldn't get money out of it in my account. They hadn't been frozen, which I first feared, but they'd been closed by the bank. Now, initially, I assumed just that, which is the bank had read all about me and decided, I don't want him as a customer. What I've learned since the book even came out was somebody was arrested within the Department of Justice in Washington, a lady who worked there, and I think her superior, who was leaking private and confidential banking information about anybody she read about that was involved in Russiagate or with Mueller or with Trump, because she hated Trump. That's what I read. And so this person has been indicted. They're awaiting some sort of charge or trial or whatever it is. And I was one of those people. Apparently there's hundreds of people whose information, because she'd read my name somewhere, was given to BuzzFeed, which is a news website, who published it. And in publishing it, when I read it, even though I was furious they'd done it, it's private information. There was nothing wrong with it. It's just BuzzFeed were like, why would Rob Goldstone have been taking out, ATM withdrawals in Bangkok? Isn't that suspicious? Well, Rob Goldstone was living in Bangkok for 6 months. Why was that suspicious? It's just they wanted to make it into something that was salacious, when the reality, when you read it, was there was nothing salacious in it whatsoever. The annoying part was that because of her, my accounts were frozen, and the story was written, and also written in a ludicrous way, but nevertheless, it was written. And, it is against the law to reveal people's private banking information, but I suppose in this world, so what? What are you going to do about it? I did think about taking legal action, but people were like, it will take you forever, nothing will come of it. She's a government employee, this, to that. So I've done nothing so far, but it was hugely, but those sorts of things are what happened.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that struck me about the book is how this story seems to generate its own momentum, and people see things which aren't there, and they build upon one fabrication, another kind of fabrication. I mean, there's lots of interesting things that are happening, but these things tend to get a little bit overblown. Like, for example, I mean, the story of the act. I mean, you were unlucky enough to be being at a lot of these key events in the history of Russiagate. But as you say, you went to the act, you saw nothing salacious there. But if you read, you read a few of the accounts, other accounts, it's like, there's this urination act, and was it a kind of foreshadowing of what happened in Russia? It's very difficult to sort of see what the reality is, even when somebody who was there.
Well, and it's that sometimes this urge, it's to me, I hate to say this, but I'll say it and then I'll qualify it, that the only thing that Donald Trump has said that I've ever agreed with, ever, is sometimes when he talks about fake news. And I'm being careful because he's generalized that and made it a really horrific argument that he used. But there are elements of it that are true, and I know that because I've lived it. And there is this insatiable need to feed a 24-hour news cycle. And it used to be in my day that, yes, you needed a story and you needed to beat out a competitor, but chances are you had at least until the next day to verify it or do something with it or have it edited or checked. Well, today that doesn't happen. People are literally on air, online, or wherever with a story within a minute. And if it's wrong, they simply will re-edit it or say they'll change it. And they don't see anything wrong with this idea of putting up a fake story and then putting up one that's less fake a day later when they found out the truth. So, yes, a lot of what I had to say was not as exciting as, people were peeing on everyone. And, I said during my testimony on Capitol Hill to one of the committees, they were asking me about the story in the Steele dossier about the idea of him hiring prostitutes to pee on each other on in a particular suite and a particular bed in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow, as many people know, because the Obamas had slept there and it was defiled the place they slept. And they asked me what I thought about this, and I told them, and I said, look, for all I know or all I actually care, Donald Trump could have been in a sea of urine from the minute he landed in Moscow till the minute he left. I really don't care. I can only tell you what I know. And what I know is that he didn't choose that hotel, as you think. He didn't ask for that. How do I know that? Because I chose that hotel, because I worked with Emin to fight against it being put in another hotel. And so, yes, it's a much better story if Trump said, I want to sleep in that room in that hotel because the Obama slept there, and here I'm going to have prostitutes pee on me. It is a great story. I don't know that they didn't do it, but what I do know is he didn't ask for it, suggest it, state it. He didn't ask us for anything in terms of where he stayed. We let them know 48 hours before. Now, in that 48 hours, as I said, he could have been peed on from the minute he got the message. I don't care. I just don't believe it happened because I know where he was a lot of the time and what was going on. And I think people have to sleep at least a few hours. And I think in today's world where everybody sells stories and everybody gives information, where's the chambermaid? Where's the CCTV? Where's the key card? Where's something that somebody goes, oh, look, here's two women walking in at 3 a.m. into the Ritz-Carlton. Here they are an hour later walking out. Or here's the key. Or I was the chambermaid who changed the bed. He's a germaphobe. Everyone knows that. So at least they would have had I don't know where all those people are. So my answer is I've no idea. But do I think it happened? No.
Well, this might feel like a loaded question. I don't mean it to be one, but as an impartial observer, when I'm reading your book, what's I feel is missing, and maybe it's missing because you just weren't aware of it, is the sense of the political reality of Russia. I mean, what's it like mixing with the super rich? Because I mean, Emin's father, Aras Aglarov, is known as Putin's builder. Was it really such a surprise that this kind of story could emerge from the world of the oligarchs? How much were you aware of that other side of Russia?
I mean, remember, I never lived in Russia. I just visited from time to time when events were happening and things were happening. And in those times, yes, I did mix with people, but I mixed with two distinct groups of Russians, for sure. I mixed with Emin and Araz's friends and colleagues and whatever who were in a bubble. They were lived in a protected bubble that was no different. Being there with them and out with them and doing stuff with them was no different to being in London or LA or New York. It was absolutely no different. Then there were friends that I made and people I knew and even people that worked for Emin who were the working class, sort of where I came from in the world. And what was very interesting was, there were a couple of things that always struck me was, Russians are fiercely patriotic to their country, even those that may hate Putin, may hate everything. They're fiercely patriotic to Russia. So they're kind of Russia first. And I think maybe Trump gets his Make America Great, all of that stuff, maybe from the way people in Russia behave, which is put us first like that. And the second thing is that Araz Agalarov was always fiercely independent of any relationship with Putin. And his answers used to be, journalists would ask him all the time, and I would overhear through translators when I was there. He'd say, I'm not Mr. Putin's friend. I'm not friendly with President Putin. I have worked and done stuff for Putin, but he was proud of the fact that he was one of those self-made oligarchs. There are two types. There's the ones who were given, like, the gas company, the oil company, the airline, the whatever. And there are those that have done really well. I'm not saying without any assistance from higher ups, but Araz was one of those that was fiercely independent. And I would say, he wasn't that chummy with Putin, because if he was, I believe Donald Trump would have met Putin when he was there for Miss Universe. And ultimately, as you read in the book, he did. There was a hilarious reason for that, which is the King of Holland being delayed in traffic. But nevertheless, if Araz had been that chummy with President Putin, I believe that his VVIP guest, Donald Trump, would have got to meet Vladimir Putin during that trip. And it never happened. He couldn't make that happen. So, yes, the book doesn't have that sort of political insight into wasn't this right for the making. But that's really because that was all like gibberish to me. I didn't know that word.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was or it wasn't. I'm fascinated to know, was this a setup of some description? I'm as fascinated as anybody else because I am of the belief that it was a bait and switch, but it wasn't a setup. It was a bait and switch in that the attorney involved always wanted to talk about the Magnitsky Act and sanctions and whatever. She just used the dangling of something else to get the meeting. Well, that's very different to what other people believe, which was it was a complete setup, a Kremlin-led thing. But maybe it was. I have no idea. And so, I'm intrigued. And that's why my book doesn't kind of pontificate about the political environment, because I don't have that sort of background. And that's what Mueller and his team and all of these people, presumably, they do. And that's why it's taking so long for them to come to some conclusion. But what I do believe is that Russiagate is an enormous puzzle. It's an enormous jigsaw puzzle. And it's made up of lots of moving pieces. And I think that the meeting, my email, the meeting, all of that will be a piece in that puzzle. But I'm not sure ultimately whether Mueller will decide that it's a piece that doesn't fit. It's very public in that my email was very clear. The meeting, once it was leaked, was very clear. There was an intent by the Trump campaign to receive. But outside of that, I don't know that it's any more than that. I really don't. But we'll see. I'm sure that report can't be far off.
You really come to the whole Russiagate from a different angle. I mean, everybody's is assuming, probably incorrectly, that the result is going to be some huge, simple to understand case. Whereas what you're presenting is actually probably the more realistic side of it, where, like you say, it's going to be like an enigma wrapped in a puzzle. I'm misquoting that, but it does feel more like it's going to be as you present it, which is, I mean, the next question I had actually was about the famous email you wrote, and Donald Trump Jr.'s reply to it. If it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. I mean, that is going to be one of the most famous quotes of 21st century. Looking back on it,
what's funny about that is, I was just going to say, what's funny about that is I have a completely different take on what that meant than the rest of the world, which is, I've said it many times now that I wrote this in a way that I hoped would get his attention, but would convey to him the fact that I wasn't really sure what the hell I was talking about, and that he should just talk with Emin about it by phone. And so when he wrote back, if it's what you say it is, I love it, I was like, oh, thank God for that. Because to me, normally I'd be like, get lost. Of course it's what I say it is. But in this case, I was like, oh, thank God. He's saying, if it's what you say it is, I love it, so maybe it isn't what you say it is. And he followed it up by saying, I think you're right. maybe I just speak with Emin about it directly first. And I was like, thank you, slam dunk, 2 for 2. I then hooked them up. They made their call. And it was after that call that Don agreed to the meeting and then famously added in his brother-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort. So when I saw that, I thought, oh, well, okay, that must have been some call. That's gone from some random meeting to now the chairman of the campaign and Kushner or whatever. But when Don said, if it's what you say it is, I love it, I read that differently to the world.
So you read it as in, your job's done, you've just made the connection, and then you're kind of out of the loop then?
And I read it as him saying, if it's what you say it is. I read the if, meaning, great, he understands that I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about.
Oh, yes.
It's too dramatic an email. So think about it. If Emin had said all of those words, well, that is really dramatic. What I did was puff and dramatize what he had said. And I thought, great, Don's got that. This has to be too good of an information email to be true. And he has since testified that he thought there was an element of showmanship or grandstanding or that I didn't quite know all of what I was talking about. So he did get it. But I understand he actually did mean it, I think, the way the world does, which is if it's what you say it is, I love it. But I took the emphasis on the if. If it's what you say it is, I love it. And to me, that's very different, which is, thank God, he's got a question mark over, what the hell are you talking about? Oh, if it's what you say it is, I love it.
Basically, what you're saying then is you're reading it as like he acknowledges that you're not in that kind of loop to know these details, but if you are in those if you are in the loop and you do know those details, he's letting you see that they are open to that kind of information.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And as many people have told me, including the people that I've given testimony to, you could, as they said to me, you can write whatever you want in an email. There's nothing wrong with it. What there is an issue with is the intent on the part of a campaign to receive this kind of information. So, that's where he has found himself. The I love it part of it, and especially in the summer, obviously relates to what was going to happen with the campaign. So that, in all of the stuff, if he'd never answered anything like that, it could be that the email, while still maybe showing some connection between him or them and Russia, would have been nothing, because as all of those people who I met with said, you can write whatever you want in an email, as long as it's not threatening or whatever. You can write what you want. There's nothing about that.
Yeah.
The intent on the part of the people to receive.
So that's why in the book you don't think, you say you don't even think Emin understood what the meeting was going to be about.
I don't. Because I know Emin's personality, which is he's very fast and does a million things at once. And I don't know this, I just believe it. I think it was like a game of telephone in a way, in which lawyer meets father, explains why she wants a meeting, father tells son has no patience, gets bare facts, fine, I'll call Rob. It's watered down even more, but yet it's refined, so just the bare bones of it, and then I'm left to get the attention of the person that matters. I think that's a lot of handing off. Now, do I know for sure? No, I don't know for sure. Maybe they all know about it, but I think that the reason Emin didn't flush out those facts when I asked isn't because he didn't want to share it with me. I think there may be an element of he hadn't bothered to actually find out, well, who was this attorney? What was it? I think it was enough that his father had asked him. And, I stated in the book, a lot of people, especially in families where there's a rich, powerful father and an only son, they do stuff for their fathers. I think Don Jr. maybe was looking to do something for his father as well and say, look, Daddy, look what I found. So I think both of them maybe had done this as kind of a favor on some level to their fathers without thinking it through.
So basically, the whole question here is, what was Emin's motivation for asking you? And you're saying, based on your knowledge of him, he's perhaps more interested in being the musician than he is the businessman, and he was just passing it on, and that's not the side of his nature which is dominant, so to speak.
I think it probably, and I don't want to talk for him because he can talk for himself when he uses to, but I think that because of this warm relationship that we'd formed, whilst we hadn't met Trump that many times, on the occasions we had, there was a very warm and cordial, and Emin really liked Donald Trump, and so did his father. I think that if his father had told him the meeting was good for Trump, I think Emin probably wanted to set it up because if it's good for Trump, great, he likes Trump. But I don't think, what I've always believed in my heart, but I don't have proof of it, I don't know that it was set up because the Kremlin thought it was good. That I don't know. That's what will be interesting to find out. I think Emin's motivation might have been that if his father had said to him, this is a good thing for Trump, or it might help him in some way, well, then I think Emin would have done it because he liked Donald Trump, not because he liked the Kremlin. But I don't know that. That, I presume, is what's being investigated as well.
Well, since you mentioned Donald Trump, you only met him a few times, didn't you? What did you make of him? Is he another one of these figures who's wrapped in a bubble?
Yeah, and he fits in with all those other ones. I met him, although I've only met him, I don't know, maybe 5 times, possibly 6. They were very, very key moments, like we spoke about. When we did this universe in Moscow, obviously I was there. When he first met the Aguilarovs in Las Vegas and we went to dinner in the act, I was there. In his office a few times I went with Emin, and I liked him because I thought he was this big, brash buffoon. And having lived in America for 20 years, I thought that his style of delivery and of making you feel like you're his mate when you've only met him for 5 minutes would propel him to victory. When he said he was going to run and announced that, obviously, but all my friends who were diehard liberals anyway were like, ha, 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 ha. And I was like, he'll win. I said it to everyone from day one, he'll win. That it has nothing to do with politics, doesn't matter even which party he's standing for, he'll win. Because America, I believe, had become a kind of reality show nation, and it was false and fake and full of like hype and drama, and it was this. Anyway, I just felt that he was the perfect figurehead, the perfect reality show president was Donald Trump, and that is what he is. And when people say to me now, "Can you believe how Donald Trump just behaved today?" I'm like, "Yeah." Have you ever looked at Donald Trump? Have you ever met Donald Trump? Yeah. Who did you think you were electing? Abraham Lincoln? Like, no, you elected Donald Trump. This is how he behaves. So if you want to go, toe-to-toe with him or hand-to-hand with him, behave like you're in The Apprentice in the boardroom. He liked all of that. Scream and shout and throw things at him and say funny things. I don't know. That's what he seemed to like. I don't see why he would be any different as a president. But, I found him... the times I was with him, I thought he was fun. He spoke of himself in the third person. I say that in the book. I find that kind of fabulous and insane at the same time. People that say, "Can you believe what Donald Trump said?" Well, yes, but you're insane. And he was very nice. People have said to me so much, "Why have you not said anything horrible about Donald Trump or Don Jr.?" And I have to say both of them, for the interactions I had, for the things I ever asked, for the things that I asked of any of them, it wasn't very much. That they couldn't have been nicer or more professional. So what am I supposed to say? However, when people ask me my opinion on him as a president, that's a different story. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I didn't support Donald Trump. So, and that's the biggest misconception about me in this entire episode. People come up to me even now in the street and say to me, one woman said to me, I pray every Sunday and I keep you in my prayers because of you, Donald Trump's our president. And I said, and that involves me because, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I don't know. They in Capitol Hill, one of them asked me some question about him and said, "Why do you think he does this or did that?" I said, "I don't know, because he's nuts. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know." But
yeah.
I said, "You elected him. I didn't elect him. That's me."
No, I was going to say that was one of the, when I said at the beginning, the book reads in an element like a tragedy, or really it's a story of a man who gets dragged into a world which doesn't in any sense represent him or his views or his...
They don't fit.
Yeah, in which you don't fit, exactly. And weirdly, we come to the story thinking, well, you were around Donald Trump, you must know the real Donald Trump, but actually you were only still seeing the public Donald Trump. And the fact that he refers to himself as the third person implies that maybe even he only sees himself as the public Donald Trump, because it's like a fiction he's created around himself.
It's a fictional character, yeah, exactly. And that's why maybe when he can say something which is an outright untruth. I was going to say lie, but let's use untruth. It sounds nicer. Maybe that's because it's Donald Trump speaking. He doesn't say I. It's like, this is what Donald Trump did. I don't know. Maybe he lives in that fictional world. And I get that because when this story was happening for me, a lot of people say, how did you get through this? And my answer is that I looked at it like, literally like I was the publicist for me who was going through this drama. And sometimes you have to do that in order to keep above, like, the madness that's going on. So, yeah, people have written that, I was Donald Trump's close friend, a family friend, a business. I was none of those things. I met him because of my relationship with Emmett. And yes, people say I introduced him. But all that means is that I got to him 2 seconds before Emmett and went, Mr. Trump, this is Emmett. If Emmett had got there first, he would have said, Mr. Trump, this is Rob. So it's that, but I never knew him.
Yeah.
People are crazy. But I have to tell you, when Michael Jackson died and I was interviewed about it, I said, why would you want to talk to me? I only spent, 10 days, 2 weeks on the road with him. They said, just so you know, people have written books who've spoken to him for 10 minutes.
Yeah, that you've probably classed as one of his closest friends in that reality.
Yeah. And then it sort of hit home. I was like, okay. So it's that kind. And Don Jr. I've met 3 times, and people behave like, he's my long lost buddy.
Yeah.
But,
and then there's a whole reality going on beyond that as well, isn't there? That you never even saw. I mean, was Ivanka went to Russia with and met Emin, didn't she? You weren't aware of any of that.
Yeah, but again, no. Well, no, because it's not exactly as it sounds. Ivanka was going to Russia for, I don't know what, but for something. And Emin and I were having dinner with Don Jr. as one of my 3 occasions I met him. And he said, said to Emin, are you around on the whatever day it is? Because Ivanka's going to be in Russia. And Emin said, well, yeah, sure. And even if I'm not, I'd make sure I was. I'd love her to see the crocus development. And they arranged for her to come. I believe she was there for either 40 minutes or 45 minutes. But it wasn't an Emin-driven visit. She was in that part of the world and in Moscow doing whatever she was doing. I don't know if it was a jewelry or fashion or something she was doing. And came there. I wasn't there. But went there, and he showed around Crocus. And I said, very nice, thank you very much. And took a picture and left. So it was, the reason that was never highlighted by us was it was never a Crocus or an Emin trip. It was like saying, oh, I'm going to be in Manchester. Now we've done this, why don't I just come and say hello to you for 5 minutes? But I'm there anyway. It's not that I'm coming there to see you.
Yeah.
So, there was a similar one when the Russian group left the meeting at Trump Tower. I was a few minutes behind them. Steve Bannon maybe said it, or Michael Wolff in Fire and Fury. Somebody said, and then they spoke with Ivanka. So I was intrigued by this because I didn't even see Ivanka. And what it turned out was, as they were getting in the elevator, she was coming out and went, hello. And they went, hello. Well, and people said to me, isn't that unusual? I said, no, what would have been unusual is if she'd said, sod off. That's unusual. It's not unusual to say hello when you're a well-brought-up person and you're on their territory. You're in her office space. So why is that unusual? But they made a big story about it, that she went, hello, and they went, hello. I mean, so I get it. I understand why you can turn that into something if you want to, but equally I understand when Trump and others scream, it's insane. It's sort of verging on fake news. I mean, it's not fake. It's just a bit mad.
Yeah. You mentioned the Michael Wolff book. Have you actually been reading up on all the various books?
I've read bits of them, and I started to become a bit of a diva and looked for myself in any of these. So I found bits of me. I read Luke Harding from The Guardian wrote Collusion. I know I'm in that. I'm not in Fire and Fury, but the meeting, and so I read bits of that, and I was like, that didn't happen, and that can't happen, and this, and, there's a bit in there where it says, after the Russian group left the meeting, and, I left with them, and I got in an Uber, and they went off somewhere else for a drink. It's like, they went back, and they got in the elevator and went to see Donald Trump. And I'm like, well, okay, here's the deal. They needed me to get them through security, to get in the first place to do it. Then Don basically literally asked me to escort them out of the building. I took them out. They went one way. I went another way. Is it possible that they went? Sure. But as I said on CNN, it's also possible that Santa Claus came down in the middle of the night and whisked Donald Trump on a magic carpet to the land of make-believe. anything possible, but do I think that this group, who they'd all but pushed out of the building because it was such an embarrassing meeting, on their own, managed to double back, go through this heavy security on their own, which they needed me for anyway, find Donald Trump? I mean, it's just a bit, whatever.
How?
So I'm.
Sorry, no. I was going to say, because we talk about the meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya. I think I pronounced it right. Does it frustrate you that you actually started to mess around with your phone rather than take copious notes now?
Well, the thing that what I have been asked a few times is, am I annoyed that Don Jr. asked me to stay? Because it's been fairly well documented. I was never supposed to be at the meeting, and I was right. And my answer really is, I'm actually glad, I'm grateful that he asked me to stay, because if I'd never been in that meeting, and even though I was messing with my phone, I only kept half an ear open, I might not be versed in politics, but I'm not completely daft. So I knew that if some smoking gun appeared that was said or delivered or done, there'd be a change in body language, even if I didn't know exactly what was being said. And the fact that I sat through this nonsense enabled me to know what went on in that meeting.
Yeah.
Forget the rest of it. For all I know, again, whatever. But in that meeting, I was there and witnessed it. And if I hadn't been asked to stay, I suppose I would have been one of the people that believed that anything could have taken place behind those doors. And then I would have felt much more exposed, like, oh my God, what did I set up? Did they pass things on? Did they do this? Did they do that? But I was actually sat there. So at least, if nothing else, I know what went on.
Yeah.
So, do I wish I'd taken notes? I don't know. It might have helped refresh my memory when I was first asked about it, because I said to anyone, you try answering questions about a meeting that you were half-assed interested in, not really, 5 years ago or 2 years ago, however many years ago it is now, and see what you can remember, especially when you're under oath. It's not easy.
Has nobody ever suggested you try hypnosis to recover memories or any of those things?
No, they haven't, because the good thing is that from the very beginning, I realized that people would want to speak to me. And when I say people, I mean people that were investigating this. And I was always there in a voluntary capacity to do it. So I was never subpoenaed. I was never, forced or compelled to do anything. I just said, whoever wants to talk to me, I'm happy to recall. So, and I was able to answer every question that was put to me. You read so much about people that said, I can't answer that, or no, or whatever, on dozens or hundreds of questions. Everything that was asked of me, I'm not saying I knew the answer to all of it, but I had an answer for all of it. So, no, it wasn't needed in my case. But maybe it's a good idea for us.
I suppose the argument is that it doesn't really matter what took place in the meeting. The fact that the meeting took place implies that there was a kind of... Is that? I think that's probably...
It implies a kind of intent.
Yeah,
I think most people accept that the meeting was garbage. But not even garbage. That the meeting was about something that they didn't think it was going to be about. I think there is a general acceptance, because independently, I think at least, I don't know how many were in the meeting, 8, but I think at least 4 or 5 of us, independently, with different interpretations of it, have said the same sort of thing without ever having spoken to each other. So I think there's a general understanding that that's what went on. But it's not about that. It's about, and sometimes when I see Don Jr. go, oh, can you believe she then had nothing? Well, I want to shake him and go, you should be saying, and thank goodness she had nothing. Not, oh, and it turned out to be about nothing. Because if it had turned out to be about something, it might be a bit more, even more dramatic than it is now.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. You mentioned actually what you said in the to the Mueller inquiry is it you sat for 2 Senate and 1 House? Am I right in remembering? Yeah. And then Mueller's. What was the experience of that like? Was it?
And then the grand jury also.
I think the grand jury is the one that fascinates everybody. Is it as low key as you describe? I mean, perhaps you can describe it now, because I'm fascinated by that.
It's terrifying in one respect, because it's the only one where you're sworn in, like you're completely under oath. Now, the others, it's not a great idea to not tell them the truth, but it's not quite the same. you're under the same sort of, they could still get you if they wanted to because you'd said something to it. But this, you are sworn like anything, whatever. Secondly, no attorneys are allowed for you. So you're on your own. And whilst attorneys don't necessarily do anything for you or any of the others, you've at least got somebody to look at if you think, do I have to answer that question? Or if they think you're being taken advantage of. So you haven't got any of that, it's just yourself. But the most horrifying thing is you've got 23 people staring at you and hanging on your every word. Well, those that aren't actually nodding off or looking like they'd do anything to get out of there, and I understand that as well. They're now in there, I think, 18th month of sitting. So it's horrifying. And, I got through it, and the questions were very much what I would expect them to have been. It's a recap of other things. And they're not really out to trick you. A lot of people say to me they're out to trick you. They're just, in my case, I suppose they wanted to lay the groundwork for if, in the future, they were to bring an action against anybody, and if any of it involved anything that was said at this meeting or a part of this meeting, I suppose the government would have the option to call me as their witness. So if anything, I would be a witness for the government about what was said. So they just want to try and have you be very clear and clarify it to the grand jury, because those are the same people they might, in the future, need to use evidence, including some of mine, to bring a case against someone.
Yeah,
so I was aware of that, but it's still horrifying.
Yeah, you're looking at a very big picture, but through a very tiny pinhole, aren't you? Really, you're just sort of seeing a small part of the case. So it's obviously you have no idea what they were asking, but I think it's just fascinating to hear from somebody who's actually been in the thing where half the world's obsessing over what's going on in the grand jury room. And
then the other part about it was when I went to speak with congressmen on Capitol Hill in one of these committees, I walked to the meeting, and all these tourists were in the Capitol building. I'd never been in the Capitol building, and I say this in the book that I was listening to people talking about how wasn't this amazing? It was a piece of American history, and I was thinking, this sounds ludicrous, but in a very small way, in a few minutes, I'm going to do something which is in itself part of American modern political history, and that to me, for somebody from Manchester, was so insane on every level that it was like, whoa, this is bizarre. Like, how am I here? I kept saying, I know the answer to it, but to everything, I just want to say, how am I involved in all of this? How am I? I sent a private email that I wrote in literally 3 minutes. I puffed up email, but one of the Senate Judiciary people said, Mr. Goldstone, in your work as an entertainment publicist or as a journalist, have you ever puffed up an email? And I said, yes, on all occasions. And
you were basically just doing your job.
Doing my job.
Yeah.
And but I get it, and I understand. It's a very important topic that's being investigated, and it's an important possible breach of all kinds of security. But I just think what infuriates me is when they say things like, Michael Flynn today said this, and Rob Goldstone sent an email. George Papadopoulos and Rob Goldstone sent an email. Vladimir Putin's in Helsinki. This relates to the email Rob Goldstone. It's not the same thing, but it's just my email is perhaps the only tangible thing that people can look at, because they can show it and see it and say, look, it says the words Trump, Hillary, Russia, and it does. So I get it.
Yeah, well, I think it's the nature of people naturally sort of try to simplify or oversimplify complicated things, and they can't understand that you're actually not part of that political world, but they lump you in there because you just happen to have those associations. Has your life improved now? Are you getting back to normal now? Or because at the end of the book, I got the sense that you were trying to return back to your year away. Are you still on your year away?
Yeah. Well, no. I just came away to I thought, stuff that I never got to do it the last couple of months, but because it's freezing in New York, I just headed out to Asia, actually. But for 20 years, I've been coming here for Christmas and New Year, so it's nothing really new. I'm just here a bit earlier. But has my life got back to normal? No, there's still people. I was in the airport in the States a month or so ago, I was standing in the line, security line, and a woman turned around, looked at me, smiled and pointed and went, "Oh, it's Trump." And I wanted to say to her, okay, well, a few months ago it was, "Oh, are you the guy who wrote the letter?" Then it was, "Oh, you're the one who got Trump elected." Now I'm just Trump.
Yeah.
So I looked at her like she was out of her mind. It was the only way I could. And she went, "Oh," and just turned around again. But no, people, I checked into a hotel in London. I was in line waiting to check in. And a man said to me, "I hope you don't mind, but I'm from the States. And I also voted for Donald Trump." And I said, "I'm not quite sure how that involves me, but thank you very much. Nice to meet you." And so, this happens all the time. And there's also people that scream things at me and horrifyingly scream things because their anger at Trump and his policies as such, that they want to take out their anger on whoever, and I'm the closest thing because I'm there at the or whatever. And I understand that, but it's not very pleasant. But yes, it has got a lot better, but it's still there. And as I say, I think that moniker, I don't mean as in Lewinsky, but it's similar. That moniker stays with me for a very long time.
Yeah. So you'd like to get back to some kind of anonymity in order to perhaps do publicity, which sounds paradoxical, but
I realistically don't think it's possible.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to, but I don't think it's possible. So now what I have to decide is whether I've become one of those awful things that I always hate, which is a talking head, a media person, a sort of I don't know what, but maybe I'm that for a short term. Or maybe I can just convince all these marvelous people that, who better to have as a publicist, who has better name recognition than me. But
I would think the latter, actually. Sorry, I was going to say, I would have thought that would work for you now.
Yes, but I'm not known, and I don't have name recognition because I won the London Marathon, where people would go, "Good on you, I want to support him," or because I have a terminal disease, or because I'm married to, I don't know, Gemma Collins. None of those things.
Yeah.
The thing I'm known for has a slightly, not even slightly, negative connotation to most of the world. So like when I said to Emin, because I meant it, Jeffrey Dahmer got a lot of PR, but it didn't do him good and he didn't get any clients from it. I was being facetious, but there was a method to what I was saying there, which is sometimes when there is a strong negative connotation, it's tough. It depends. We'll see what happens. And, a year from now, I might have a totally different outlook on it. And I certainly have a different one from what I had a year ago. But in the short term, and I think this is still the short term, because in the States, this story is talked about 24 hours a day. I think for as long as Trump is there, it's still there.
Yeah, well, I suggest that in the next year you should think about a tour as a raconteur telling your tales, because you really do tell a really good story. And like you say, I mean, what I loved about the book was it wasn't all about Trump. I found,
right,
and like I say, the central relationship between yourself and Emmy was just fascinating. And I really can't. I would talk to you for another hour, but I know I've been given instructions to keep it short, and we've gone to an hour now. So
brilliant.
So
well, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And anytime you need me for anything, let me know. I'm here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and I'll end the conversation here.
The end is in sight.
The colourful phrase used by a charismatic figure. This is the Trump shutdown.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the nations of the world.